The man in seat 2A had less than a minute to breathe, and Evelyn Foster was the only person on the plane who noticed. 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, the overnight flight from New York to Rome had settled into the uneasy calm that came after dinner service. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft amber, window shades were lowered, and the steady hum of the engines wrapped the passengers in artificial night. Evelyn guided the beverage cart through business class, collecting half-finished cups and answering quiet requests with the practiced warmth she had learned during 6 years in the air. Her feet ached inside her navy pumps, and the clock near the forward galley told her they were still more than 4 hours from the nearest suitable airport. She had worked longer flights. She had handled frightened children, sudden turbulence, medical scares, and passengers who believed a first-class ticket came with ownership of everyone wearing a uniform still. Something about the man in seat 2A kept pulling her attention back. Antonio Vitelli had boarded at Kennedy with 3 men who never seemed to relax. They wore dark suits beneath their travel coats and had taken seats close enough to watch him without appearing to do so. Antonio himself had spoken only once, declining champagne in a low, controlled voice. He looked to be in his late 30s, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and the composed stillness of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Evelyn had assumed he was a diplomat, a private equity executive, or perhaps the kind of attorney whose clients never appeared in daylight. Then she noticed his coffee. She had placed it beside him 20 minutes earlier. He had not touched it. His right hand rested on the armrest, fingers curled too tightly against the leather. A faint sheen of perspiration marked his forehead, though the cabin was cool. Evelyn stopped beside his seat. "Mr. Vitelli?" His eyes opened, but they did not focus on her. "Are you feeling all right?" For a moment he seemed irritated by the question. Then his breathing changed. It became shallow and uneven, each breath quieter than the one before it. Evelyn set the tray down and crouched beside him. "Sir, can you tell me what's wrong?" Antonio tried to answer, but no words came. His hand moved toward his throat. Evelyn's fatigue vanished. Training took over. She signaled sharply toward the forward galley. "Bring the emergency medical kit and notify the captain." One of Antonio's companions rose at once. "What is happening? Please step back and give him space." The man did not move, neither did the other two. Evelyn looked directly at him. Something in her voice must have reached him, because he stepped into the aisle and motioned for the others to do the same. Evelyn checked Antonio's breathing and pulse. His skin was growing pale. His lips had lost color. She saw slight swelling near his jaw and remembered the meal service, the sealed medication case one of his men had placed in the overhead compartment, and the way Antonio had pressed 2 fingers against his chest shortly after takeoff. She did not guess at a diagnosis. Guessing weight, she followed procedure. "Mr. Vitelli, stay with me. Can you hear me?" His gaze found hers for half a second. There was no fear in it, only frustration, as though his own body had committed an unforgivable act of disobedience. Another flight attendant arrived with the medical kit and portable oxygen bottle. Evelyn fitted the mask over Antonio's face and instructed her colleague to ask whether any licensed medical professional was aboard. The announcement sounded through the cabin. Conversations stopped. Reading lights clicked on. Curtains shifted as passengers leaned forward to see. Antonio's pulse weakened beneath Evelyn's fingertips. The physician who answered the call was a pediatrician from Boston, still pulling on his shoes as he hurried down the aisle. Evelyn gave him a clear summary of what she had observed and what she had already done. He listened, checked Antonio, and requested the emergency medications while the crew established contact with a ground-based medical service. The airplane trembled lightly as it entered a band of turbulence. Glasses rattled in the galley. Evelyn braced one knee against the seat and kept the oxygen mask steady. "Stay with us," she said. Antonio's eyes were closed now. The physician asked for the automated external defibrillator to be brought nearby as a precaution, then directed Evelyn to prepare the medication indicated for a severe allergic reaction. She verified the label, dosage, and instructions with him before handing it over. Every action had to be deliberate. Behind her, Antonio's companion stood motionless. Their silence felt heavier than panic. One of them spoke into a phone in rapid Italian, but Evelyn caught only a name repeated twice: Vitelli. The medication was administered. For several seconds nothing changed. Then Antonio pulled in a deeper breath. Another followed. Color began returning slowly to his face. The physician kept monitoring him while Evelyn relayed updates to the cockpit. The captain had already begun coordinating a diversion towards Shannon Island, the closest airport capable of receiving them safely. Around them, the entire cabin had fallen silent. Not the ordinary quiet of sleeping passengers. This was different. It was the silence of people realizing that the stranger in seat 2A was not merely wealthy, and that the men surrounding him were not ordinary assistants. Antonio opened his eyes again. This time they were clear. He looked past the physician, past his companions, and directly at Evelyn. The doctor told him not to speak. Antonio ignored him. His voice was rough and barely audible through the mask. "Your name?" Evelyn hesitated. "Evelyn Foster." His gaze remained fixed on her as though he were committing the answer to memory. Then the man standing in the aisle lowered his phone and whispered something to the others. Evelyn did not understand the Italian words, but she understood their effect. 3 powerful men straightened at once. Across the cabin, a passenger near the curtain quietly lowered his eyes. Another turned away. The physician glanced at Evelyn, suddenly uneasy. Antonio Vitelli closed his hand around the edge of the blanket, his breathing steadier now, and spoke one final sentence before exhaustion claimed him. "No one forgets the person who gives him back his life." The aircraft had already begun its gradual descent towards Shannon when Evelyn realized Antonio Vitelli was not the only person watching her. The pediatrician remained beside him, checking his pulse and oxygen level, while the cabin crew secured the galley for landing. But Antonio's 3 companions tracked every movement around seat 2A with a discipline that made ordinary concern look careless. Evelyn kept her attention on the medical situation. His breathing had improved. The color in his face had returned. The swelling near his jaw had stopped spreading. Those were good signs, but the physician warned that the reaction could return without notice. Antonio needed a hospital observation and answers no one could provide at 37,000 feet. Evelyn updated the captain through the interphone, speaking slowly enough to be precise. The ground medical team had confirmed that emergency services would meet the plane immediately after landing. Airport security had also been notified because of the number of people traveling with the patient. Though Evelyn suspected the captain had chosen his words carefully, men like Antonio Vitelli did not fit neatly into routine reports. When she returned to business class, Antonio was awake again. The oxygen mask still covered his nose and mouth, but his eyes followed her with unsettling clarity. Evelyn checked the tubing, then asked the physician whether he needed anything else. "Keep him calm," the doctor said. "No unnecessary movement. We are about 20 minutes out." Antonio lifted one hand and removed the mask just enough to speak. "I am calm." The physician gave him a tired look. "Then you should have no trouble following instructions." One of Antonio's companions almost smiled, but the expression disappeared before Evelyn could be certain she had seen it. Antonio replaced the mask without argument. That small act surprised her more than it should have. He carried authority so naturally that obedience seemed foreign to him. Yet he had recognized the physician's role and accepted it. Perhaps power did not always mean refusing limits. Perhaps real power meant knowing when a limit mattered. Evelyn pushed the thought aside. She did not know this man. She knew only that he had nearly stopped breathing and that someone in his party had been speaking urgently in Italian since the moment he collapsed. The man nearest the aisle ended another call and approached her. He was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and probably in his early 40s. His voice remained polite, but his posture did not soften. "Miss Foster, my name is Marco Bellini. I handle security for Mr. Vitelli. Right now, the doctor handles Mr. Vitelli." Marco studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Understood. I need to know exactly what he consumed. The medical team will receive a full report. I served him coffee, which he did not drink, and the standard business class meal. Your group submitted dietary information before departure. He ate very little, I noticed. Did anyone approach his seat while we were away?" Evelyn felt the question settle heavily between them. "Away when?" "Before takeoff, at the gate. Passengers were boarding, crew members were working. I cannot give you a complete list from memory." Marco's eyes shifted toward the overhead compartment above Antonio's seat. The small black medication case was still inside, exactly where his party had placed it. Evelyn remembered it because one of the men had insisted that it remain within reach. "That case," she said. "Does it contain prescription medication?" Marco did not answer immediately. "Yes. The hospital will need to know what is inside." His jaw tightened. "It will go with him. It should go directly to the medical team." Marco looked ready to object, but Antonio raised 2 fingers from his seat. The gesture was slight. Its effect was immediate. Marco stepped back. No one spoke for several seconds. Evelyn became aware of the passengers pretending not to listen. A woman across the aisle stared at a closed magazine. A man near the window had not turned a page in 5 minutes. Even the usual sounds of dissent seemed muted beneath the tension. The landing announcement came over the speakers. Evelyn and the physician secured Antonio as safely as possible without compromising his care. His companions took their seats nearby, though Marco remained angled toward him, every muscle alert. Evelyn moved through the cabin for the final safety check. Her hands stayed steady, but her thoughts did not. Severe reactions had causes: food, medication, an environmental trigger. Sometimes the explanation was simple, sometimes it was not. She reminded herself that finding the cause was not her responsibility. Her responsibility was to keep the cabin secure and deliver the passenger alive to people equipped to treat him. The wheels touched down hard enough to make the overhead bins shudder. Reverse thrust roared through the cabin. No one applauded. The aircraft slowed, turned from the runway, and stopped at a remote stand where emergency vehicles waited beneath white floodlights. Through the window, Evelyn saw paramedics, airport police, and 2 black vehicles parked beyond the marked security line. The seatbelt sign remained on. The passengers stayed silent. When the forward door opened, cool Irish air swept into the cabin. The medical team boarded quickly. Evelyn gave her report while the physician transferred responsibility. Antonio listened from the stretcher, pale but fully conscious. As the paramedics prepared to move him, Marco reached for the black medication case. Antonio's gaze shifted to it, then to Evelyn. Something changed in his expression, not fear, recognition. He spoke a few quiet words in Italian. Marco froze, released the handle, and stepped away. Antonio looked at Evelyn one last time before the stretcher moved toward the open door. "Make sure that case goes to the hospital unopened," he said. Then his eyes settled on Marco with a coldness that emptied the cabin of warmth. "And do not let anyone from my family touch it." Evelyn remained beside the forward door until the last paramedic disappeared down the stairs with Antonio Vitelli. The cold air from the runway pressed against her face, sharp enough to clear the fog of exhaustion from her mind. Behind her, passengers shifted in their seats, whispering now that the man from 2A was gone. The silence had broken, but the tension had not. Marco Bellini stayed near the overhead compartment, one hand resting against the closed door above Antonio's seat. He had not touched the medication case again. 2 airport police officers boarded and asked the crew to keep everyone seated while they completed a brief review of the medical diversion. Evelyn answered questions about the timeline, the meal service, the emergency call, and the items Antonio had brought aboard. She kept her responses factual, no assumptions, no theories. The black case remained sealed where it had been stored. When the officers asked who had access to it, Marco replied before she could, "Only Mr. Vitelli and his private physician." Evelyn looked at him. "There was no physician traveling with your group." Marco's expression did not change. "His physician prepared the case before departure." One of the officers wrote that down. The other asked whether anyone had opened it after boarding. Marco said no. Evelyn could not confirm that. She had seen the case placed overhead, but she had also spent most of the flight serving passengers in other cabins. A sealed object was not the same as an untouched object. She told the officers exactly that. Marco watched her carefully, not with anger, but with the attention of someone measuring the weight of every word. When the interviews ended, the captain announced that the aircraft would remain on the ground while the airline arranged a replacement crew and reviewed the diversion. The passengers were escorted into the terminal in small groups. Evelyn expected Antonio's men to leave first, but Marco stayed behind until the black case had been transferred into the custody of an airport medical liaison. He signed a document, requested a copy, and then turned toward Evelyn. "You should rest. That is the plan. Your hotel has been changed." She stopped beside the galley. "I did not request a change. The airline did. Then the airline can tell me." Marco's gaze held hers. "Miss Foster, the crew hotel listed on your original itinerary is no longer appropriate." A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with the open aircraft door. "Appropriate for what? For your safety?" Evelyn lowered her voice. "I did my job. I am not part of whatever this is." "You became part of it when Mr. Vitelli told us to protect you. He was under medication and barely conscious. He knew exactly what he was saying." Marco spoke without pride or drama that made the words more unsettling. Evelyn looked past him toward the empty seat in 2A. The blanket remained folded across the cushion. The untouched coffee still sat in the cup holder, cold beneath the cabin lights. She remembered Antonio looking at the medication case before warning his own men away from it. That had not sounded like confusion. It had sounded like suspicion. Was he expecting this? She asked. Marco's eyes shifted slightly. No. Then why did he tell you not to let his family touch the case? Marco took a breath, but whatever answer he considered never came. His phone rang. He turned away and spoke in Italian, quieter this time. Evelyn understood only fragments. Hospital, stable, testing. Then a name she had not heard before, Luca. Marco ended the call and looked toward the cockpit. We need to leave. Who is Luca? Someone who should not know where we are. That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give you. The flight crew began gathering their belongings. Evelyn's supervisor approached with a strained smile and confirmed that airline operations had moved them to a hotel near the airport. Transportation was waiting outside. Evelyn felt a brief rush of relief until she saw Marco standing beside the exit with one of his men. "They are not coming with us," she said. Her supervisor glanced at Marco, then lowered her voice. "Corporate security requested an escort because of the incident. We were told it is temporary." That explanation sounded official enough to calm the crew, but it did not calm Evelyn. Corporate security did not wear custom suits and speak in coded Italian. She collected her bag, checked that her identification was secure, and followed the others into the terminal. The airport had emptied with the late hour. Fluorescent lights reflected across polished floors, and the sound of rolling luggage echoed through long corridors. Marco walked 20 feet behind them. He never appeared hurried. He never looked lost. At the baggage checkpoint, Evelyn noticed a man near the closed currency exchange counter. Grey coat, dark baseball cap, no suitcase. He was watching the crew, but not all of them. His gaze stayed on her. Evelyn looked away, then checked the reflection in the glass storefront beside her. The man lifted a phone to his ear. Marco saw him at the same moment. Not faster, sharper. He moved between Evelyn and the stranger without touching her. One of his men stepped toward airport security and spoke quietly. The man in the grey coat turned and walked toward a side corridor. "Keep moving," Marco said. Evelyn's pulse began to climb. "Who was that?" "I do not know." "Then why did he leave when you noticed him?" Marco did not answer. Outside, a black van waited beside the crew shuttle. Rain misted beneath the parking lights. "Evelyn stopped with my crew." "Of course. And your men are not entering the hotel," agreed. His answer came too easily. Evelyn studied him. "What are you not telling me?" Marco looked toward the terminal doors where the man in the grey coat had not reappeared. The hospital completed the first blood tests. Evelyn waited. Mr. Vitelli did not suffer a random allergic reaction. Marco's voice dropped. Someone placed a substance in his prescription medication before he boarded in New York. The sounds of the airport seemed to recede. Evelyn thought of the sealed black case, the warning about family, and the stranger watching her from inside the terminal. "Why would anyone follow me?" Marco's face hardened with quiet certainty. "Because you kept Antonio Vitelli alive, and whoever wanted him dead now knows your name." The crew shuttle pulled away from the terminal under a ceiling of low grey clouds, its windshield sweeping aside a steady Irish rain. Evelyn sat near the front with her overnight bag pressed against her knees and watched the airport lights blur across the glass. No one spoke for the first several minutes. Her co-workers were exhausted, confused, and too polite to ask why two unfamiliar men were following them in a separate vehicle. Evelyn did not have that luxury. Marco Bellini's words had lodged in her mind with the weight of a warning she could not ignore. Someone had altered Antonio Vitelli's medication before he boarded in New York. Someone had wanted the medical crisis to look natural. And now someone knew her name. She looked over her shoulder through the rear window. The black vehicle remained 3 car lengths behind them, steady through every turn. Her supervisor, Denise Harper, finally broke the silence. "Corporate says we will be briefed in the morning." Evelyn turned back. "Did they say what the briefing is about?" Denise hesitated. "The medical diversion security, legal procedure, and the men behind us." Denise lowered her voice. "The airline verified Mr. Bellini's identity through the hospital and local authorities. He is acting as a private security liaison." The explanation sounded polished. It also sounded incomplete. Evelyn had worked for the airline long enough to recognize language designed to end questions rather than answer them. "Did corporate know who Antonio Vitelli was before we landed?" Denise looked toward the driver. "Not officially." That answer told Evelyn enough. The hotel stood about 12 miles from the airport, a modern glass building beside a quiet business park. The crew shuttle stopped beneath a covered entrance where a night manager waited with key cards prepared. Marco's vehicle pulled in behind them but stayed outside. He had kept his promise. His men did not enter the lobby. Evelyn should have felt relieved. Instead, She noticed the security camera above the revolving door, the second camera near the elevators, and the uniformed guard standing beside the reception desk. The hotel had not arranged that level of attention for a delayed flight crew. Denise distributed the room keys. Evelyn's room was on the 4th floor, 2 doors from the elevator and directly across from another flight attendant. She checked the lock before entering, then checked it again after the door closed. The room was clean, quiet, and ordinary. Beige curtains, white bedding, a desk beneath the television, nothing that should have made her pulse race. She set her bag down and called her mother in Pennsylvania. It was after midnight in Ireland, but still early evening at home. Evelyn kept the conversation simple. The flight had diverted because of a medical emergency. Everyone was safe. She would be delayed. She did not mention Antonio, altered medication, or the man in the grey coat. Her mother worried enough without being given reasons. After the call, Evelyn washed her face and stood beneath the shower until the hot water began to cool. She expected exhaustion to pull her into sleep. Instead, every time she closed her eyes, she saw Antonio's hand moving toward his throat and heard the cabin fall unnaturally quiet around him. At 1:30 in the morning, someone knocked on her door. 3 measured taps. Evelyn stayed still. The knock came again. "Miss Foster," Marco said from the hallway. "It is Bellini." She did not open the door. "You said your men would not enter the hotel." "They did not. I came alone." "Why?" "Because Mr. Vitelli asked to speak with you." Evelyn glanced at the clock. "He is in a hospital. He is conscious, stable, and refusing to rest until he knows you are safe." The sentence irritated her more than it reassured her. "Tell him I am safe. He wants to hear that from you." Evelyn considered refusing. Then she remembered the man near the currency exchange and the way he had watched only her. She slid the security latch into place and opened the door 2 inches. Marco stood alone, holding a phone in one hand. He looked more tired than he had on the aircraft, but no less controlled. "Put it on speaker," she said. Marco did. Antonio's voice came through faintly, roughened by medication and fatigue. "Miss Foster, you should be sleeping." A quiet pause followed. "So should you." "I would be if your security chief had not knocked on my door." Marco's expression remained neutral. Antonio almost sounded amused. "Then I owe you another apology. You owe me an explanation." The silence on the line changed. It became deliberate, careful. "You will have one," Antonio said. "But not over a hotel of your business. No, that is why you are in danger." Evelyn tightened her grip on the door. "Then involve the police. They are involved. They cannot protect you from a person they have not identified. And you can? I can reduce the opportunities." The answer was calm, not arrogant. That made it harder to dismiss. Evelyn looked at Marco. He did not appear pleased by the conversation, but he did not interrupt. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing tonight," Antonio said. "Lock your door. Do not leave alone. In the morning, speak to the authorities and your airline, then make your own decision." Evelyn had expected an order. The absence of one unsettled her. "My own decision about what?" Another pause. "Whether you will let me move you somewhere safer until we know who altered my medication." Evelyn leaned her forehead briefly against the doorframe. "You do not even know me." Antonio's reply came softly. "I know you saw a dying stranger and moved toward him when everyone else moved away." The line went quiet for a moment before he added, "That is more than most people ever reveal about themselves." Then the call ended. Marco lowered the phone. Evelyn started to close the door, but he spoke before the latch caught. "There is one more thing." She stopped. The airport reviewed the security footage. "The man who watched you in the terminal arrived from New York on a private flight 2 hours before we landed." Evelyn felt the room seemed smaller around her. "Do they know his name?" Marco met her eyes. "Yes." "Who is he?" Marco's voice dropped. "Luca Vitelli, Antonio's cousin." Evelyn did not sleep after Marco Bellini left her door. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the curtains half open, watching rain slide down the glass and trying to understand how a man she had never met had crossed an ocean before her diverted flight even landed. Luca Vitelli was not a coincidence. He was a warning with a name. At 6:30 in the morning, the airline sent a representative and a local police officer to take formal statements from the crew. Evelyn answered every question carefully. She described Antonio's symptoms, the timing of the meal service, the medication case, the man in the terminal, and Marco's explanation about the altered prescription. She did not leave anything out, including Antonio's instruction that no one from his family touch the case. The officer listened without interruption, then explained that airport investigators had already secured footage and passenger records. Luca Vitelli had entered Ireland legally on a private aircraft registered to a consulting firm in Luxembourg. He had not committed a crime by being present in the terminal. Watching someone was not enough to detain him. Evelyn understood the words, but they did nothing to settle the pressure beneath her ribs. The airline representative offered to place her on the first commercial flight back to New York. For one hopeful second, the option felt like escape. Then the officer asked whether anyone knew her home address. Evelyn thought of the passenger manifest, crew records, social media, and the airline badge she wore every working day. Probably, she admitted. The officer did not disagree. By 8 o'clock, the rest of the crew had been cleared to leave the hotel. Evelyn stayed behind. Denise Harper hugged her before boarding the shuttle and promised that the company would keep her schedule confidential. Evelyn appreciated the effort, but secrecy after exposure felt like closing a door after the storm had already entered. Marco waited in the lobby near the windows, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered her one without ceremony. "No sugar," he said. "You did not take any on the flight." Evelyn accepted it, then immediately resented that he had noticed. "Where is Antonio?" "Still at the hospital. The doctors want to observe him for at least 24 hours. And Luca, gone from the airport. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be." Marco gestured toward a quiet seating area near the lobby fireplace. Evelyn remained standing. "Mr. Vitelli asked me to bring you to the hospital, but the decision is yours." "Why does he want to see me?" "Because the preliminary investigation found something he believes you should know. The police can tell me. They know part of it." Marco's expression tightened. "Antonio knows why it matters." Evelyn looked through the glass doors at the grey morning outside. Returning to New York might take her home, but it would not return her life to what it had been before Seat 2A. She could spend the flight wondering who was watching the aisle. She could enter her apartment wondering who knew the building. Ignorance no longer felt safe. It felt defenseless. "I will go to the hospital," she said, "but I speak to him alone." Marco nodded, agreed. The hospital stood on the edge of the city, 6 stories of pale stone and reflective glass. Local police were positioned near the main entrance, and hospital security checked Evelyn's identification twice before allowing her upstairs. Marco stopped outside Antonio's private room as promised. Evelyn entered alone. Antonio sat upright against white pillows, wearing a hospital gown beneath a dark robe someone had brought from outside. An intravenous line ran to his left hand. A monitor beside the bed marked each heartbeat with a soft electronic tone. Without his tailored suit and silent entourage, he should have looked less imposing. He did not. He looked tired but alert, controlled. His gaze moved to her coffee before settling on her face. "You came for answers. Good." He pointed toward the chair near the window. Evelyn remained standing until he lowered his hand. "Luca is your cousin," she said, "my first cousin, and you think he altered your medication. I think he knew it had been altered. That is not the same thing." A faint expression crossed Antonio's face. Approval, perhaps. "No, it is not." He reached toward a folder on the bedside table, but stopped when the intravenous line pulled against his wrist. Evelyn moved the folder closer without thinking, then stepped back. Antonio opened it and removed a photograph printed from airport security footage. It showed Luca in the terminal, phone raised, his face partly visible beneath the cap. "This was taken 18 minutes after our aircraft arrived," Antonio said. "He should have been in Rome. Why? Because he was scheduled to represent me at a private meeting there." Evelyn studied the image. "Then why was he in Ireland?" "That is the question." Antonio placed a second page beside the photograph. It showed a time-stamped record from a private aviation company. His flight plan was filed before my medical emergency began. Evelyn read the departure time twice. Luca had left continental Europe while Antonio was still breathing normally over the Atlantic. "He knew your flight would divert," she said, "or he knew I would become ill and positioned himself near the most likely diversion route. Shannon was not guaranteed. No, but it was predictable based on our location and the aircraft type." Evelyn felt cold despite the warmth of the room. "Then this was planned before you boarded." Antonio nodded once. "The altered medication was placed in a sealed travel package prepared at my residence. Only 4 people had authorized access. Luca was one of them." "Yes." "Who were the other 3? Antonio looked toward the rain beyond the window. "Marco, my physician, and my younger sister, Sophia." Evelyn thought of his warning on the aircraft. "Do not let anyone from my family touch it." "You suspected your own sister?" The aunt suspected without hesitation, but something in his expression changed when he said her name. Not doubt, pain. Evelyn finally sat down. "Why tell me this?" Antonio's gaze returned to her. "Because Luca did not come to Ireland to watch me. He could have learned my condition through other channels. He came to watch me." Yes, the monitor continued its measured rhythm between them. Evelyn tightened both hands around the coffee cup. "What does he think I know?" Possibly nothing. Antonio's voice lowered. But people who plan carefully fear accidents. You were the accident that kept me alive. That still does not explain why I matter. It does if Luca believes I spoke to you before losing consciousness. It does if he thinks you saw someone near the medication case. It does if he simply wants to know whether saving my life made you valuable to me. Evelyn held his gaze. Did it? Antonio did not answer immediately. He looked at her with the same unnerving focus he had shown on the aircraft. But there was no command in it now, only certainty. Your life was valuable before you knew my name, he said. My debt merely made me responsible for protecting it. Evelyn stood. I am not a debt, no. Antonio's voice softened. You are the reason I still have one to repay. Before Evelyn could respond, Marco opened the door without knocking. His composure was intact, but barely. Antonio, Luca has contacted the hospital. Antonio's expression became still. What did he want? Marco looked at Evelyn before answering. He asked whether Miss Foster had arrived. Luca's question changed the room more completely than any alarm could have. Marco closed the door behind him and lowered his voice. The call came through the hospital switchboard. He gave his full name, asked for Antonio's condition, then asked whether Miss Foster was here. Evelyn looked from Marco to Antonio. How would he know I came? He may not know, Antonio said. He may be testing the answer. Marco placed his phone on the bedside table. The switchboard did not confirm anything. They transferred the call to hospital security and he disconnected. Evelyn set down her coffee before her hands could betray how tightly she was holding it. Then he knows enough to ask. Antonio's attention moved to the window, where rain streaked the glass in thin silver lines. The heart monitor beside him continued its steady rhythm, but something in his expression had gone still. Marco, confirm who was told she would be brought here. You, me, the local police liaison, and the airline representative. Not through us. Evelyn heard the distinction. Through us, she repeated, meaning someone else could have seen me arrive. Marco nodded once. The hospital has public entrances, staff entrances, and several cameras visible from outside. It would not be difficult to watch the building without entering it. Antonio reached for the telephone beside his bed. Marco stopped him with a quiet reminder that the doctors had ordered rest. Antonio looked at him until Marco withdrew his hand. Antonio said. Evelyn stood immediately. No one is moving me without explaining where. A secure residence outside the city, Marco replied. Private medical staff, controlled access. No published connection to Antonio. It is. And who controls it? I do. Evelyn looked at Antonio. You expect me to trust the same people who had access to your medication? Marco's face tightened, but Antonio did not take offense. No, he said. I expect you to question everyone, including me. That answer slowed her anger. Antonio pushed the folder across the table toward her. You have 3 choices. Return to New York today, remain under police supervision here, or stay somewhere my security team can control access. And which one do you want me to choose? The one that keeps you alive and still allows you to make your own decisions. That is not an answer. Then stay here under police protection until you are satisfied. Antonio, the hospital is exposed. She asked for a choice. His voice remained quiet, but Marco fell silent. Evelyn noticed the cost of the exchange. Antonio was not merely giving her control. He was overruling the instincts of the man responsible for his safety. She looked at the door, then back at the photograph of Luca. How long would I have to stay at this residence? Until the police identify who altered the medication or confirm that Luca is no longer a threat, Antonio said. Days, not weeks, if the evidence moves quickly. And my airline? They will be told you are cooperating with an active investigation and are medically unavailable for duty. Evelyn frowned. I am not medically unavailable, then security unavailable. A trace of humor touched his voice, gone almost immediately. The wording can be accurate. Marco's phone vibrated against the table. He read the message and looked toward the door. Hospital security found a vehicle parked across from the east entrance. The registration is false. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs slowly. Is Luca inside? They cannot confirm. The windows are tinted. Antonio's expression hardened. We do not wait for confirmation. He pressed the call button beside the bed. A nurse entered moments later, clearly prepared to object to anything involving movement. Antonio spoke before she could. I need to be transferred to another facility. Mr. Vitelli, your doctor has not cleared you for discharge. Then he may arrange a medical transfer. The nurse looked to Marco, then to Evelyn, as though hoping someone in the room might be reasonable. Evelyn stepped closer to the bed. You nearly died less than 12 hours ago. You are not leaving because someone parked across the street. I am leaving because if the vehicle is connected to Luca, this hospital has become part of the problem. And if moving you causes another medical emergency, Antonio held her gaze, then I assume you will tell me I made a foolish decision. I will tell the doctor before you make it. For the first time, Marco openly smiled. It was brief but real. Antonio looked at Evelyn with an expression she could not name. Do that. The physician arrived 10 minutes later and refused discharge but agreed to a monitored transfer to a private clinic after speaking with police and hospital administration. Antonio would travel by ambulance with medical staff. Evelyn would leave separately through a service corridor with Marco and a female hospital security officer. The plan was careful, legal, and more frightening because of how necessary everyone believed it was. Before they left, Evelyn stopped beside Antonio's bed. I am going to the residence for one night, she said. After that I decide again. Agreed. No locked doors from the outside, no confiscating my phone, no speaking for me with the police or my airline. Agreed. And no more information withheld because you think it is safer. Antonio's eyes remained on hers. I can promise honesty about anything that concerns you directly. That sounds carefully limited. It is the most honest promise I can make. Evelyn considered that, then nodded. A nurse entered with transfer paperwork. Marco opened the door and checked the hallway before motioning for Evelyn to follow. They moved through a staff corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, past laundry carts and closed supply rooms, toward an elevator reserved for hospital personnel. The security officer pressed the lower-level button. As the doors began to close, a man at the far end of the corridor stepped into view. Grey coat, dark baseball cap, no luggage. Evelyn recognized him before Marco did. He simply not approach hand, touched 2 fingers to the brim of his cap, and smiled as the elevator doors sealed between them. The elevator descended in silence, but Evelyn could still see Luca Vitelli's smile after the doors closed. It had not been the smile of a man surprised to find her. It had been the smile of someone confirming that a plan was still working. Marco pressed the emergency stop button between floors. The elevator halted with a soft mechanical jolt. What are you doing? The hospital security officer asked. Changing the route, Marco said. He took out his phone and called the police liaison without explaining further. Evelyn stood near the back wall, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Panic would not help. Neither would pretending she had not recognized Luca. He was outside Antonio's room, she said. He knew which corridor we were using. Marco ended the call. Then the service exit is compromised. How? The security officer asked. Someone gave him the transfer details, or he followed a person who knew them. Evelyn looked at Marco. That means the leak is not only outside the hospital. His expression told her he had reached the same conclusion. We return to the 4th floor, he said. Police are securing the corridor. He released the stop button, and the elevator began moving again. Evelyn watched the numbers rise. Why did he let us see him? She asked. He could have stayed hidden. Marco's gaze remained on the doors. Because he wanted you frightened, or he wanted Antonio to know he could reach me. Marco did not answer, which felt like agreement. When the doors opened, 2 uniformed officers were waiting. They escorted Evelyn and the security officer into an administrative office with no exterior windows. Marco stayed in the hallway, speaking rapidly into his phone. Through the glass panel in the door, Evelyn saw hospital staff moving with controlled urgency. No alarms, no shouting, just doors closing, access cards being checked, and ordinary routines tightening around an invisible threat. 10 minutes later, Marco entered. Luca is gone. The cameras show him leaving through the main entrance before security reached the corridor. Did anyone stop him? Evelyn asked. No, he did not threaten anyone, and there is still no warrant for his arrest. So he can walk into a hospital, find me, and leave. For now. Marco placed both hands on the desk and leaned forward slightly. The police have agreed to escort you to a different location, not the residence we discussed. That address may be known. Where? A coastal property used by a medical charity Antonio funds. It is about 40 miles from here. The clinic is closed for renovations, and the attached guest house is secure. Evelyn shook her head. If Luca knew the hospital route, why would a different location be safer? Because no one involved in the original transfer knew about it until 5 minutes ago. Who knows now? Antonio, me, the police liaison, and the physician arranging Antonio's transfer. Evelyn thought of the 4 people who had known about the medication case. That list does not make me feel better. It should not, Marco said. It should make you careful. A knock sounded. The physician entered, followed by a uniformed officer. Antonio's transfer had been delayed. His condition remained stable, but the doctor refused to move him until the security situation was resolved. Evelyn felt an unexpected wave of relief. Whatever danger Luca represented, Antonio was safer inside a monitored hospital than on a road with limited medical support. "Then I am staying here," she said. Marco immediately objected. "No, you said I had a choice. You do. Staying in the same building Luca already entered is not one of the safe choices. Then put me under police protection in another hotel." The officer spoke carefully. "Miss Foster, a public hotel creates more variables. Staff, guests, deliveries, outside access. The coastal site gives us greater control." Evelyn disliked how reasonable that sounded. She disliked even more that Antonio's world was beginning to redefine what reasonable meant. "I want to speak to him before I leave." Marco glanced at the physician, who nodded. They returned to Antonio's room through a secured corridor. This time 2 officers remained outside. Antonio was sitting in the chair beside the window rather than in bed, the intravenous line still attached to his hand. His face looked pale, but his attention sharpened the moment Evelyn entered. "You saw Luca. It was not a question. He saw me." Antonio's jaw tightened. "Did he speak?" "No." He smiled. Something cold passed through Antonio's expression, but his voice stayed controlled. "That is how Luca announces himself when he wants someone to understand that distance will not protect them." Evelyn moved closer. "Then why is he still free?" "Because suspicion is not evidence, and because your family name opens doors." Antonio looked at her for a long moment. "Sometimes. Today it opened the wrong one." Marco explained the new plan. Antonio listened without interruption, then asked who had approved the coastal property. Marco listed the names. Antonio's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "You should go. You are staying. The hospital is the safest place for me until the doctors clear a transfer, and I am supposed to trust strangers at a closed clinic. You will have police protection. Marco will remain with you." Evelyn looked at Marco. "He is responsible for your safety. At the moment you are the greater risk." She heard the words before she understood them. "Because Luca thinks I matter to you." Antonio did not deny it. The monitor beside the bed marked 3 steady beats. "Because Luca believes he can use your fear to control my decisions," he said. "Can he?" Evelyn asked. Antonio's eyes held hers. "He can influence them. He cannot control them." The honesty in his answer unsettled her more than reassurance would have. Evelyn folded her arms. "Then tell me one thing without hiding behind careful language. Why was Luca supposed to represent you in Rome?" Antonio looked toward Marco, then back at her. "He was carrying documents that could remove him from my organization permanently." The room seemed to narrow. "He knew?" "He suspected. So the medication was altered because you were about to cut him out. That is one possibility, and the other," Antonio's voice lowered, "that someone wanted me to believe Luca did it." Evelyn felt the full shape of the trap then. Luca had access, motive and opportunity. He had also made himself visible in Ireland, almost too visible. "You think he may be bait. I think every obvious answer deserves a second look." A nurse entered and reminded Antonio that he needed rest. Evelyn turned toward the door, but Antonio spoke before she reached it. "Evelyn." She looked back. "At the coastal house there is a locked study. Do not enter it." Marco's head lifted sharply. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "Why tell me about it?" Antonio's expression became unreadable. "Because if that door is open when you arrive, you will know someone reached the house before you did." The road to the coast narrowed as the city disappeared behind them. Rain moved across the windshield in silver sheets, and the police vehicle ahead became a pair of red lights in the distance. Evelyn sat in the rear seat beside the female security officer while Marco drove. No one spoke for the first 20 miles. The landscape changed from concrete and streetlights to stone walls, dark fields and low hills fading beneath the clouds. Evelyn watched every turn and tried to memorize the route. It was an old habit from years of traveling alone. Know the exits, know the distance. Know how to get back. The coastal property appeared shortly before noon, hidden behind iron gates and a line of wind-bent trees. Beyond them stood a white stone clinic with covered windows and scaffolding along one side. A smaller guest house rested behind it, facing a grey ocean that stretched to the horizon. The place looked quiet enough to be forgotten. That did not make it feel safe. The police officers checked the main building first. Marco remained beside Evelyn until they received confirmation that the property was clear. Then he unlocked the guest house and stepped inside ahead of her. The air smelled faintly of dust, salt, and recently used cleaning products. Someone had prepared the house despite the clinic being closed. Fresh towels sat folded near the stairs. Bottled water filled the refrigerator. A small medical kit rested on the kitchen counter. Evelyn noticed all of it because order could hide intention as easily as chaos. "Who prepared this place?" she asked. "A property manager," Marco said. "When?" "Early this morning, before or after Antonio decided to send me here." Marco paused before. Evelyn looked at him. Then this was already part of a plan. It was one of several emergency locations available to him. That is not what you said at the hospital. At the hospital? I said no one involved in the transfer knew we would use it until minutes before departure. That remains true. The distinction was precise. Antonio's influence seemed built from precise distinctions. Evelyn placed her bag on a chair but did not remove her coat. The police officers began checking doors and windows while Marco walked through the ground floor. At the end of a narrow hall stood a dark wooden door with an old brass lock, the study. Evelyn stopped several feet away. Antonio's warning returned with perfect clarity. If that door is open when you arrive, you will know someone reached the house before you did. The door appeared closed. Marco reached for the handle. Do not touch it, Evelyn said. He turned. Antonio told me it should be locked. Marco's expression changed. He told you that. He said the door would show whether someone arrived before us. Marco stepped closer without touching the handle and examined the lock. A thin scratch marked the brass near the keyhole, fresh, bright against the darker metal. Was that here before? Evelyn asked. I do not know. Then call the property manager. Marco made the call on speaker. The manager confirmed that the study had been locked during his inspection at 7 that morning. He had not entered because the room was excluded from routine access. No one else had permission to use the property. Marco ended the call and asked the police liaison to photograph the lock before opening it. Evelyn stood near the kitchen doorway while an officer used the authorized key. It turned without resistance. The door opened inward. The room beyond was small and lined with built-in shelves. Most of them were empty. A desk faced the window, its surface clean, except for a black leather folder placed carefully in the center. Marco did not enter. That does not belong here, he said. The officer pulled on gloves and approached the desk. Evelyn stayed behind the threshold, watching. The folder contained no weapon, no threatening note, and no obvious sign of danger. Only a single photograph. The officer lifted it by the edges. Evelyn recognized the setting before she recognized herself. The image showed the business-class cabin during boarding at Kennedy Airport. Antonio stood near seat 2A, speaking to Marco. Evelyn was visible in the background, arranging service items at the galley. The photograph had been taken from inside the aircraft. Who had access to the cabin before departure? Marco asked. Evelyn forced herself to think past the fear rising in her chest. Cleaning crews, catering teams, maintenance staff, gate agents, flight crew. Too many people, she said. The officer turned the photograph over. A line of typed text appeared on the back. Marco read it aloud. She was not supposed to notice. Evelyn felt the room tilt slightly. Though the floor remained still beneath her, Antonio's collapse had not been planned around her. Her intervention had been the mistake. The photograph proved someone had watched the cabin before takeoff and had known where Antonio would sit. It also proved Luca was not the only person involved. Marco stepped away and called Antonio. The hospital answered through a nurse, then connected the call. Marco explained what they had found. He kept his voice controlled, but Evelyn could hear the strain beneath it. Antonio asked to speak with her. Evelyn, Antonio said, his voice weaker than before but clear. Leave the house. The police are here. Leave anyway. Why? A pause followed, and when he spoke again, the careful calm was gone. Because that folder was not meant to frighten you. It was meant to keep us inside while someone confirmed we had arrived. Evelyn looked toward the ocean-facing windows. Beyond the glass, the empty road curved past the gate and disappeared behind the trees. Then one of the officers near the front entrance raised his radio. A vehicle had stopped outside the property. It carried no license plates. Marco moved toward the hall and told Evelyn to stay back. She tightened her grip on the phone. Antonio, who knew about this house before today. The silence on the line lasted 1 second too long. My sister, he said. Sophia manages the charity that owns it. The vehicle without license plates remained outside the gate for less than 30 seconds before rolling away. But the message it left behind stayed inside the house. Evelyn stood near the kitchen with Antonio's voice still in her ear and watched Marco move through the hallway with the police officers. No one raised their voice. No one rushed. That restraint made the danger feel more real. Was it Sophia? Evelyn asked. Antonio did not answer immediately. The silence carried hospital sounds from his side of the call. A monitor, distant footsteps, the soft movement of someone adjusting equipment. I do not know, he said at last. She had access to the property. That is not proof. Evelyn looked toward the open study door. The photograph still rested inside an evidence sleeve on the desk. You suspected Luca because the evidence pointed to him. Now the evidence points to Sophia. That may be exactly what someone wants. Then who benefits from turning you against both of them? Antonio's breathing remained measured, but she heard strain beneath it. Someone who wants the family divided before I return to Rome. Marco came back into the room. The road is clear. Local officers are checking traffic cameras. He looked at the phone in Evelyn's hand. Antonio, we are moving her, not by the main road, Antonio said. Use the service lane behind the clinic. Marco's expression tightened. That route crosses open farmland for 2 miles. It also has no public access and no connection to the front gate. Evelyn listened as the 2 men weighed distance, visibility, and police coverage in short, precise sentences. She understood enough to know that neither option was safe. One was simply less predictable. Stop talking about me as if I am cargo, she said. The room went quiet. Marco lowered his phone. Antonio spoke first. You are right. Evelyn walked to the window overlooking the ocean. Waves struck the dark rocks below, white against grey water. I am not going anywhere until I know whether that vehicle came here because of me or because of what is inside this house. There should be nothing inside the house, Marco said. There is a photograph taken aboard the aircraft and a message addressed to your investigation. That is something. She turned back. And if the folder was meant to keep us here, then leaving immediately could be the reaction they expected. Marco studied her with new attention. What are you suggesting? Check the rest of the property before we move, not only for people, for anything placed here to track where we go next. The police liaison nodded. A vehicle tracker, a phone, a device in luggage, or something already connected to the security system, Evelyn added. Marco looked toward the ceiling camera above the entry hall. He ended the call with Antonio only after promising an update within 10 minutes. Then the house became a place of quiet inspection. The officers checked the vehicles, the luggage, the electrical panel, and the small network cabinet inside a utility closet. Evelyn stayed with the female officer in the kitchen, though every part of her wanted to follow. Waiting felt unnatural after hours of acting. On the plane, she had known what to do. Oxygen, medical kit, ground support. Here, every decision depended on motives she could not see. 5 minutes later returned, holding a small black object sealed inside a clear evidence bag. It was attached beneath the rear bumper of the police vehicle, he said. Evelyn stared at it. A tracker? Yes. Then whoever placed it expected us to use that vehicle, or placed it earlier and followed the signal. At the hospital, Marco nodded once, most likely in the underground loading area. The implications settled over her. Luca had not only found the corridor. Someone had known the exact vehicle assigned to the transfer. How many people knew which car I would take, she asked. That Marco's answer came slowly. Police liaison, the hospital security office, the transfer coordinator, me, and Antonio? Yes. Evelyn looked at him. You forgot the physician. Marco's face changed. Not much, but enough. The physician knew the schedule, not the vehicle. Could he have seen it? Possibly. The officer entered from the hallway carrying a tablet. We found an unauthorized connection to the guest house security network. It activated at 7:12 this morning, 2 minutes after the property manager completed his inspection. From where? Marco asked. A remote address routed through several servers. We cannot identify the source yet. Evelyn thought of the fresh towels, the bottled water, the prepared medical kit. Someone had known the house would be used before Marco claimed the decision had been made. The property manager did not prepare this place for us, she said. Marco looked toward the kitchen supplies. He prepared it because someone told him to. The officer checked her notes. The charity office in Rome. Evelyn's pulse tightened. Sophia's office. Marco did not deny it. He called Antonio again. This time a nurse answered and said he was resting after a sudden drop in blood pressure. The physician had restricted all calls for at least 1 hour. Evelyn felt an unexpected pull of concern so sharp that she had to look away. Antonio was still recovering. While his family turned suspicion into a maze, he was lying in a hospital bed, trying to direct every exit. Marco requested the charity office records through Antonio's legal team, then ordered the police vehicle removed from service. A second escort was arranged from a neighboring district. No one outside the room was told their destination. Evelyn watched him work and realized how quickly he had stopped treating her as a passenger in the crisis. He asked what she had noticed. He listened when she answered. That change should have reassured her. Instead, it made the situation feel larger. The officer near the study called them back. She had examined the photograph more closely. In the reflection of the aircraft window, almost hidden behind Antonio's shoulder, another figure was visible near the boarding door. A woman with dark hair holding the same black medication case later placed above seat 2A. Marco took the image and went completely still. Evelyn stepped closer. The face was blurred by the glass, but a silver pendant at the woman's throat caught the cabin light. Marco knew it. "Who is she?" Evelyn asked. He did not answer until she repeated the question. "Sofia Vitelli," he said. Antonio's sister was on the aircraft before boarding began. Evelyn studied the blurred reflection until the silver pendant became the only clear thing in the image. It was small, oval, and unmistakably deliberate against Sofia Vitelli's dark clothing. Marco held the photograph under the kitchen light, angling it toward the window, but the face remained indistinct. "You are certain it is her?" Evelyn asked. "I have seen that pendant every day for 15 years, he said. "It belonged to Antonio's mother." The answer made the room feel colder. Why would Sofia be on the aircraft before boarding? She sometimes inspects his travel arrangements. Sometimes, when the trip involves family business. Evelyn looked toward the open study. The folder, the message, the tracker, the remote security access, and now Sofia's presence inside the GNOR. That was exactly what worried her. Evidence that arrived in perfect order could be truth. It could also be design. "Do not call her yet," Evelyn said. Marco turned. "Why not? Because whoever placed that photograph here wants Antonio to see it. If Sofia is responsible, calling warns her. If she is not, calling tells the real person the trap worked." Marco's expression tightened, then settled into reluctant agreement. He contacted the police liaison and asked that the image be compared against airport security footage from Kennedy. The answer would take time. The photograph had been taken during pre-boarding, when only approved staff and authorized guests should have had access to the cabin. Every name on that list mattered now. The replacement police escort arrived 20 minutes later in an unmarked vehicle. Before they left, officers searched it from front to back and checked every electronic device carried by the group. Evelyn watched the process without speaking. Her sense of safety had changed. Locks no longer meant protection. Official vehicles no longer meant trust. Even family photographs had become possible weapons. They left through the service lane behind the clinic, crossed 2 miles of open farmland, and joined a coastal road heading north. Marco had chosen a temporary police residence near a small town, not another property connected to Antonio. Evelyn sat in the rear seat and kept her phone turned off inside a signal-blocking pouch provided by the officers. The ocean appeared between gaps in the stone walls, dark and restless under the afternoon sky. "How long has Antonio suspected Luca?" she asked. Marco kept his eyes on the road. "Several months. And Sofia?" He did not suspect her, but he warned everyone away from the medication case. Antonio learned early that trust and access are not the same thing. Evelyn watched the back of his head. "That sounds like something people say after trust has already failed." Marco did not answer. The temporary residence was a modest 2-story house beside a local police station, deliberately ordinary in every way. No gates, no marble, no private staff. A narrow garden bordered the back fence, and a kettle sat on the kitchen stove as if someone had left only minutes earlier. 2 officers remained downstairs while Evelyn was shown a bedroom on the 2nd floor. The window overlooked the station parking lot. For the first time since the aircraft landed, she could see marked police cars without feeling trapped by them. Marco took a call in the hallway. His voice dropped, but Evelyn heard Antonio's name and the word stable. Relief moved through her before she could stop it. She disliked that reaction because it revealed a connection she had not agreed to make. Antonio was still a stranger whose life she had saved, a stranger whose danger now followed her across countries. When Marco ended the call, Evelyn stepped into the hallway. "Is he away?" "Yes. His blood pressure has improved." "Did you tell him about Sofia?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because the doctors restricted his calls. And because we need confirmation before giving him an image that could divide his family." That answer was careful enough to sound like Antonio. Evelyn returned downstairs. A detective from airport security called through a secure line 30 minutes later. He confirmed that a woman matching Sofia's description had entered the aircraft before general boarding using a temporary access badge issued to a private medical courier. The badge had been requested by Antonio's physician's office and approved through the airline's executive travel desk. The detective could not confirm whether Sofia had carried the medication case because a service cart blocked the camera for several seconds. When the view cleared, the case was already inside the cabin. "Who requested the badge by name?" Evelyn asked. The detective checked the record. "Dr. Emil Caruso." Marco went still. "Antonio's physician," Evelyn said. "Yes," Marco replied. The third person with authorized access to the medication. The pattern shifted again. Luca had motive. Sofia had opportunity. Dr. Caruso had authority. Each piece pointed in a different direction, and all 3 pieces met at Antonio's private circle. Evelyn pressed both palms against the kitchen counter. "Where is Dr. Caruso now?" Marco called Antonio's legal office. The answer came quickly. Dr. Caruso had left Rome that morning on a flight to Geneva for a medical conference. His phone was turned off. His clinic claimed he had taken emergency leave. "That is convenient," Evelyn said. Marco's face remained unreadable. Too convenient. The secure phone rang again before anyone could continue. This time the caller identification showed the hospital. Marco answered. Antonio's voice came through stronger than before. "Put Evelyn on." Marco handed her the phone. "You found Sophia in the photograph," Antonio said. "It was not a question." Evelyn looked at Marco. "You were supposed to rest." "I was. Then my sister called the hospital. She said Luca asked her to place the medication case on the aircraft because he claimed my physician had changed the travel protocol." Evelyn felt every person in the room listening. "Did she know what was inside?" "She says no." "Do you believe her?" Antonio was silent for several seconds. "I believe she is afraid." "Of Luca?" "No." His voice lowered. "Of Dr. Caruso." Evelyn looked at Marco. "Why?" Antonio answered before she asked. "Because Sophia says Caruso was not treating me. He was collecting information about everyone in my family." The room seemed to close around the words. "For whom?" Evelyn asked. Antonio's reply came quietly. "That is what she wants to tell me in person." A pause followed, "and she is already on her way to Ireland." Sophia Vitelli arrived in Ireland before sunset under police escort and without the private staff Marco expected. Evelyn watched from the second-floor window as a dark sedan stopped beside the station and a woman stepped out wearing a charcoal coat, flat shoes, and the same silver pendant from the photograph. She looked younger than Antonio, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a low knot and a face made pale by exhaustion. Nothing about her arrival resembled the entrance of someone who expected to be obeyed. She carried one small bag as officers led her inside. Marco met her in the hallway downstairs. Evelyn remained near the landing, close enough to hear the first words between them. "Where is my brother?" Sophia asked. "Still at the hospital." "And Evelyn Foster?" Sophia looked up before Marco answered. Her eyes found Evelyn at the top of the stairs. Fear crossed her face so quickly that it could not have been performed. "You should not be here," Sophia said. Evelyn came down one step at a time. "I have heard that several times to Dag. Dr. Caruso knows about you. Everyone seems to know about me. No, I mean he knew before Antonio collapsed." The room went still. Marco closed the front door and asked the officers to remain outside the kitchen. They agreed only after confirming that Sophia had been searched and that the conversation would be monitored from the adjoining room. Evelyn sat across from Sophia at a small wooden table. Marco remained between them, standing near the counter. "Start at the beginning," he said. Sophia looked at him with the weariness of someone who had already told herself the same story too many times. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Caruso asked me to help change Antonio's travel medication. He said the usual supplier had issued a recall. He had paperwork, sealed packaging, everything I would expect from his office. "Why did he ask you?" Evelyn asked. "Because Antonio had stopped trusting Luca with travel arrangements and Caruso knew I still had access to the executive desk." "Did you open the package?" "No." Sophia's answer came immediately. "I carried it onto the aircraft before boarding and placed it where Caruso instructed. I thought I was helping." Marco's voice hardened. "You did not confirm with Antonio. Caruso said Antonio had approved it. You should have asked." Sophia lowered her eyes. "I know." Evelyn watched her hands. They trembled only when Caruso's name was spoken. "What changed?" she asked. Sophia looked up. 2 days ago, I found a copy of a private report in Caruso's office. He had created medical profiles on all of us. Antonio, Luca, me. Even our aunt in Naples. The reports included stress responses, medications, sleep patterns, travel habits, and family conflicts. "Why?" Marco asked. He called it risk assessment, but some files were marked with names of companies I did not recognize. "Did you copy them?" Sophia opened her bag slowly and removed a small envelope. "I photographed what I could." Mark of the officers entered, took the envelope into evidence, and left again. Evelyn leaned forward. "Who hired Caruso?" Sophia pressed her lips together before answering. "A financial group based in Geneva. At least that is what the records showed. The same city he claimed to be visiting," Marco said. Sophia nodded. "I confronted him this morning. He denied everything. Then he told me Antonio's flight had diverted and asked whether I had spoken to anyone about the medication package." "What did you say?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing. I left." "And Luca?" Sophia's expression changed. "Luca called me 10 minutes later. He said Caruso was setting him up and that Antonio would blame both of us. He told me to stay in Rome. But you came here, Marco said, because Luca knew details from the medical report that I had never shared with him. The meaning reached Evelyn slowly. So Luca had access to Caruso's information, or Caruso gave it to him, Sophia said. I do not know which is worse. Marco called the hospital and requested a secure video connection with Antonio. The doctor allowed 5 minutes. When Antonio appeared on the tablet screen, he looked exhausted but alert. Sophia's composure broke for the first time. She covered her mouth, then lowered her hand. I am sorry, she said. Antonio did not respond immediately. His gaze moved from Sophia to Marco, then to Evelyn. Tell me everything, Sophia repeated the story without leaving out her mistake. Antonio listened with the same stillness Evelyn had seen on the aircraft, but the heart monitor behind him sounded slightly faster when Caruso's files were mentioned. Did he name the Geneva group? Antonio asked. Marco wrote it down. Antonio's expression became colder. They manage assets for several families connected to Luca. Then Luca hired him, Sophia said. Not necessarily, Antonio replied. Financial firms collect leverage for whoever pays first. Evelyn heard the warning beneath the words. The evidence still pointed too cleanly in one direction. What did Caruso want from your family? She asked. Antonio looked at her through the screen. Control without appearing to take control. By making you distrust one another, yes. Sophia leaned closer to the tablet. There is more. One file was labeled with Evelyn's name. Evelyn felt every sound in the room disappear. That is impossible. Caruso did not know me before the flight. Sophia shook her head. The file was created 6 months ago. Marco stepped forward. What was in it? Employment history, flight routes, home address, her mother's address in Pennsylvania. Evelyn's hands went cold against the table. Antonio's voice changed. Why would a physician in Rome have a file on her? Sophia looked directly at Evelyn. Because the medication was never the beginning of the plan. The tablet speaker the steady rhythm of Antonio's monitor. Evelyn forced herself to ask the question. Then what was? Sophia took one breath. Your assignment to Antonio's flight. Evelyn stared at Sophia as if the words had changed the shape of the room. Her assignment to the flight had felt ordinary, a schedule update, a crew substitution, the kind of adjustment airlines made every day without explanation. Now every ordinary detail seemed capable of hiding intention. How could anyone control my assignment? She asked. Sophia looked toward Marco, through the executive travel desk and a staffing contractor connected to the Geneva group. Caruso's file included your work history, your emergency medical training, and records of the routes you flew most often. Evelyn felt the meaning gather slowly. They did not choose me because of Antonio. They chose you because you were likely to respond, Sophia said. If he became ill, they needed someone competent enough to keep him alive. Marco frowned. That makes no sense. The plan was to kill him. No, Evelyn said before Sophia could answer. The realization arrived cold and complete. The plan was to make him vulnerable. Antonio's face remained still on the tablet screen, but his eyes sharpened. Evelyn continued. If he died, his organization would fracture in ways no one could predict. If he survived after a controlled medical crisis, everyone around him would be forced to react. Family members would accuse each other, security routes would change, private records would be opened, people would reveal who they trusted. Sophia nodded. Caruso was collecting those reactions, and I was part of the test, Evelyn said. A trained stranger placed close enough to save him, but unconnected enough to appear accidental. The idea made her stomach turn. Every choice she had made on the aircraft had been her own, yet someone had counted on those choices before she ever boarded. Antonio looked away from the screen for a moment. When he returned his attention to her, something in his expression had changed. Not weakness. Anger held so tightly that it became almost quiet. Marco, he said, contact the airline through legal counsel. Preserve every staffing record, schedule change, contractor request, and access log connected to Miss Foster for the past year. Already in progress, Marco replied. The police will need authorization from the airline and the staffing company. They will have it. Evelyn leaned forward. No, they will have my permission where my records are concerned, not yours. Antonio's gaze met hers. Agreed. The immediate answer surprised her. She had expected resistance, perhaps even an argument about urgency. Instead, he gave control back without bargaining. And my mother, Evelyn said. Her address was in that file. She is being contacted by local authorities in Pennsylvania, Marco said. Not by our people, Antonio insisted. Evelyn looked at the tablet. You arranged that? I requested a welfare check through official channels, Antonio said. Nothing more. Relief came carefully, edged by fear. Thank you. The words felt strange between them, too simple for everything that had happened. Antonio inclined his head. You should not have needed to thank me for protecting someone who should never have been involved. Sophia lowered her eyes. Marco stepped away to answer another call, leaving the room quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the measured tone of Antonio's monitor through the speaker. Evelyn looked at Sophia. What else was in my file? Performance reviews. Reports from 2 incidents where you assisted passengers during medical emergencies. Public records? Some, not all. Sophia's voice softened. There was also a psychological assessment. Evelyn's pulse tightened. Based on what? Your decisions, your work history, interviews with former supervisors that were presented as routine background checks. They studied whether I would help. Yes. Evelyn stood and walked to the window. The police station parking lot below looked almost painfully normal. A patrol officer carried coffee toward the entrance. Rainwater gathered in shallow silver pools along the curb. 6 months of her life had been observed, reduced to patterns, and placed inside a file by strangers who believed courage could be scheduled like a departure time. She thought of the aircraft. Antonio struggling to breathe, the physician hurrying down the aisle. Her own hands moving through training without hesitation. No report had made that choice. No hidden plan had owned it. She turned back. They expected me to save him, she said, but they could not know I would notice the medication case. No, Sophia replied, that may be where their plan failed. Antonio's voice came through the tablet. It failed the moment you refused to become predictable. Evelyn looked at him. I did exactly what they predicted. You saved me, yes. His expression remained steady. But afterward you questioned Marco, challenged the hospital plan, found the tracker, and refused to accept the obvious suspect. That was not in their file. Something in her chest eased, not because the danger had lessened, but because the choice still belonged to her. Marco returned with a printed document from the airline's legal department. A staffing adjustment had been submitted 48 hours before departure, moving Evelyn onto Antonio's flight after another attendant was reassigned. The request came through a subcontractor that handled executive passenger coordination. The subcontractor was owned by a holding company managed by the Geneva Group. The police finally had a traceable connection. Can they arrest Caruso? Sophia asked. Not yet, Marco said. But they can freeze records, secure warrants, and stop treating this as a family dispute. Antonio closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Luca must be found before Caruso contacts him. You still think Luca may not be involved? Evelyn asked. I think Luca is selfish enough to be used and arrogant enough not to realize it. Antonio's voice weakened slightly, though his tone did not. That makes him dangerous, but not necessarily the architect. A nurse appeared behind him and announced that the call had to end. Antonio ignored her for one final moment. Evelyn, when this is over, you will be free to leave without obligation to me. She studied his face on the screen. I was always free to leave. A faint, tired smile touched his mouth. That is why I believe you may choose to stay long enough to finish this. Before she could answer, the screen went dark. Marco's phone rang almost immediately. He listened, asked one question, and looked towards Sophia. Sophia rose from her chair. Where? Marco's expression became grave. At the airport, trying to board a flight to Geneva. Evelyn felt the final pieces begin to move. Was he alone? Marco shook his head. No. Dr. Caruso was waiting for him at the gate. The news that Luca and Dr. Caruso had been found together changed suspicion into evidence, but not yet into certainty. Evelyn listened as Marco spoke with the police liaison, gathering facts one careful sentence at a time. Luca had reached the airport using a false reservation but his real passport. Caruso had arrived from Geneva on a private aircraft less than an hour earlier. They were stopped at the gate after airport security matched Caruso's name to the medical investigation and Luca's face to the hospital footage. Neither man had resisted, neither had explained why they were traveling together. Sophia stood near the kitchen table. One hand closed around the silver pendant at her throat. Luca would never meet Caruso in public unless he believed he was protected, she said. Marco ended the call. He believed the Geneva group had arranged safe passage. Then Caruso was not working for Luca, Evelyn said. They were both working for someone else. Marco looked at her, or Caruso convinced Luca that was true. The police arranged formal interviews at the airport while financial investigators began tracing the Geneva firm. The records moved faster once the airline staffing manipulation, the altered medication, and the false medical courier badge were connected. By evening, the outline of the plan became clear. Dr. Caruso had collected private information on the Vitelli family for a financial group attempting to force control over several companies Antonio intended to remove from their influence. Luca had secretly cooperated, believing the pressure would weaken Antonio and increase his own authority. He had not been told the full plan. Sofia had been used to place the package because her access appeared trustworthy. Evelyn had been assigned to the flight because Caruso believed her emergency training would keep Antonio alive long enough to create confusion, dependency, and division. The medical crisis had never been intended to end Antonio's life. It had been designed to make everyone around him reveal where they stood. What the planners had not anticipated was how quickly Evelyn would notice the inconsistencies, or how strongly Antonio would refuse to let suspicion become judgment without proof. Luca admitted enough to protect himself from the worst accusations. Caruso refused to speak, but the records from Geneva spoke for him. Payments, travel requests, medical files, internal messages. They did not reveal a dramatic mastermind hiding behind a curtain. They revealed something colder and more ordinary. Executives, consultants, and advisors who believed people could be reduced to pressure points and managed like numbers on a balance sheet. By the next morning, Evelyn was allowed to return to the hospital under police escort. Antonio had been transferred to a private room with fewer restrictions, though the monitors and intravenous line remained. He was sitting by the window when she entered, dressed in a white shirt and dark slacks instead of hospital clothing. He looked steadier than the day before, but not fully recovered. Marco and Sofia waited outside, leaving them alone. Evelyn placed a paper cup of coffee on the table beside him. "No sugar," she said. Antonio looked at the cup, then at her. "You noticed that seems to be what caused all this trouble." A faint smile touched his face. It also ended it. Evelyn sat across from him. For several seconds, neither spoke. The room was quiet except for the rain against the glass and the soft rhythm of the monitor. "Luca will cooperate with the investigation," Antonio said. "Caruso will face charges in several countries. The Geneva Group's accounts are being reviewed. And Sofia? She made a mistake. She also came here knowing I might never forgive her. Will you?" Antonio looked toward the window. Trust returned slowly. "That was not my question." He met her eyes again. "Yes, eventually." Evelyn nodded. It was the answer she had hoped for, though she had not realized it until he gave it. Antonio leaned back slightly. "Your airline has arranged a flight to New York tomorrow. Police in Pennsylvania confirmed your mother is safe. Your schedule and home address are being protected while the investigation continues. You handled all of that? Through legal channels with your permission. Good." His mouth almost curved again. "You sound disappointed that I followed the rules." "Surprised." "I am learning." The words were simple, but their meaning rested between them. Evelyn looked at the man who had commanded rooms through silence and suspicion, and she understood that survival had not changed him in one dramatic moment. Change was appearing in smaller choices, listening instead of ordering, asking instead of taking, allowing trust to be rebuilt rather than demanded. "You said I could leave without obligation," she said. "You can, and if I stay long enough to see you discharged?" Antonio's expression became very still. "Then I would be grateful. Only grateful. I am trying not to make promises while wearing a hospital identification bracelet." Evelyn laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them. It softened the room in a way power never could. 3 days later, Antonio walked out of the hospital under medical supervision. There were no waiting cameras, no line of black cars, and no public display. Only Marco, Sofia, and Evelyn beneath a pale Irish sky. At the airport, Evelyn prepared to board her flight home. Antonio stopped several feet from the security entrance, respecting the boundary without being asked. "Will I see you again?" he said. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag. "That depends. On what?" "Whether the next meeting is planned by you, not by a physician, a financial group, or a staffing contractor." Antonio lowered his head once. "Then I will ask properly." 6 months later, Evelyn landed in Rome on a scheduled route she had chosen herself. When the aircraft door opened, Antonio was waiting beyond the gate security line with 2 cups of coffee and no entourage beside him. He did not claim her time. He did not assume her answer. He simply held out 1 cup and said, "Welcome back, Evelyn." She accepted it because this nothing had been arranged behind her back. No file had predicted her decision. No hidden plan had assigned her courage. She walked beside him because she chose to. And Antonio Vitelli, a man who had spent his life believing control was the same as safety, finally understood that the strongest bond in the world was the one no one was forced to keep.